The Arab-Israeli War of 1948. Iran's modern military history did not begin with revolution or missile strikes. It began with a quiet decision made thousands of miles from its own borders. In 1948, when Arab states marched into the newly declared State of Israel, Iran under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi took a cautious stance. Iran was one of the few Muslim-majority nations that did not send troops, and it would later become one of the first in the region to recognize Israel diplomatically. Yet Iranian volunteers quietly joined Arab forces, and political pressure at home was immense. This early tension between official policy and public sentiment planted seeds that would grow into one of the most dramatic foreign policy reversals of the 20th century. The Azerbaijan Crisis of 1946. Before any conventional war, Iran faced an existential threat from within its own borders, backed by a foreign superpower. After World War II, Soviet troops who had occupied northwestern Iran refused to leave. They supported the creation of a Soviet-backed separatist republic in Iranian Azerbaijan. The Iranian government, fragile and under enormous pressure, had to navigate a diplomatic crisis without a strong military to rely on. Prime Minister Ahmad Kavam traveled to Moscow, negotiated skillfully, and managed to secure a Soviet withdrawal, partly by promising oil concessions he later cancelled. It was a masterclass in statecraft over firepower, and it revealed something essential about Iran: it often fought its greatest battles through politics rather than open war. The Anglo-Iranian oil crisis and coup of 1953. This was not a war fought on a battlefield, yet its casualties shaped Iran's history for decades. When Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in 1951, Britain and the United States responded with economic sanctions and, ultimately, a covert operation. In 1953, CIA and MI6-backed agents orchestrated a coup that removed Mossadegh from power and restored the Shah's full authority. Iranians called it the 28 Mordad coup, and it burned itself into national memory as proof that foreign powers would crush Iranian sovereignty whenever it threatened their interests. The resentment it generated never faded, and decades later, it would fuel the very revolution that transformed Iran into a different kind of state entirely. The Kurdish Revolt and the Algiers Accord of 1975. Few conflicts reveal Iran's strategic calculations more clearly than its involvement in the Kurdish insurgency in Iraq. Throughout the early 1970s, the Shah secretly armed and supported Kurdish rebels led by Mustafa Barzani, who were fighting the Ba'athist government in Baghdad. It was a proxy war fought in mountain terrain, designed to weaken a rival neighbor rather than seize territory. Then in 1975, Iran and Iraq signed the Algiers Accord, resolving a border dispute over the Shatt al-Arab waterway. The moment the ink dried, the Shah withdrew all support from the Kurds, overnight. Barzani's forces collapsed within weeks. It was a cold and calculated abandonment that illustrated how Iran treated regional conflicts as instruments of statecraft, not matters of principle. The Iranian Revolution and the seizure of the American Embassy, 1979. The revolution itself was not a foreign war, but it immediately triggered one, and reshaped every conflict Iran would fight afterward. When Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi fled in January 1979 and Ayatollah Khomeini returned from exile, Iran did not simply change governments. It changed its entire identity. The new Islamic Republic declared itself an enemy of both American imperialism and Soviet influence. When revolutionary students seized the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and held 52 diplomats hostage for 444 days, Iran crossed a threshold. It became internationally isolated almost instantly. The hostage crisis poisoned relations with the West, froze Iranian assets abroad, and left the country diplomatically exposed, just as a far more dangerous threat was gathering on its western border. The Iran-Iraq War, 1980 to 1988. This was the war that defined modern Iran more than any other, 8 years of industrial-scale slaughter that left over 1 million dead on both sides. Saddam Hussein launched his invasion in September 1980, expecting a quick victory over a revolution weakened Iran. He was wrong. Iran's regular army had been purged of Shia officers, but the Revolutionary Guards and waves of volunteer Basij fighters compensated with sheer determination. Iran recaptured Khorramshahr in 1982 in one of the war's most brutal battles. Iraq responded with chemical weapons, mustard gas and nerve agents used openly against Iranian positions. The international community largely looked away. The war ended in 1988 with no territorial changes and no victor, but Iran emerged with a battle-hardened military doctrine, a deep mistrust of the West, and a determination never to fight alone again. The Tanker War, 1984 to 1988. Inside the larger Iran-Iraq War, a separate and often overlooked conflict played out on the waters of the Persian Gulf. As Iraq began attacking Iranian oil tankers to strangle its economy, Iran retaliated by targeting ships supplying Arab states that backed Baghdad. This naval campaign became known as the Tanker War, and it drew in the United States directly. American warships began escorting Kuwaiti oil tankers under U.S. flags, a mission called Operation Earnest Will. In 1988, the USS Vincennes shot down Iran Air Flight 655, killing all 290 civilians on board, after mistaking it for a military aircraft. The US called it a tragic error. Iran called it a war crime. The incident cemented Iran's belief that America was an active combatant in the war, not a neutral party. The Afghan Civil War and Iranian involvement, 1990s. After the Iran-Iraq ceasefire, Iran did not retreat from regional conflict, it expanded its reach eastward. During Afghanistan's devastating civil war of the 1990s, Iran backed the Northern Alliance and various Shia Hazara factions against the Sunni Pashtun Taliban. The Taliban's ideology was not just politically opposed to Iran, it was theologically hostile to Shia Islam. In 1998, Taliban forces overran the Iranian consulate in Mazar-i-Sharif and executed Iranian diplomats and intelligence personnel. Iran nearly went to war with Afghanistan in response, massing troops on the border before pulling back. The episode revealed how deeply Iran perceived sectarian threats and how far it was willing to project force to protect Shia communities, a principle that would define its regional strategy for the next 3 decades. The Israeli-Palestinian and Lebanese conflicts, Iranian proxy dimension, 1982 onward. Iran's most enduring military projection has never required Iranian soldiers crossing a border. After Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982, Iran sent Revolutionary Guards to help organize and train a new Shia militia, Hezbollah. What began as a guerrilla resistance force became one of the most capable non-state armed groups on Earth, with precision missiles, battle experience from Syria, and deep roots in Lebanese society. Iran similarly extended financial and military support to Palestinian factions including Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Through these relationships, Iran transformed itself into a regional power capable of threatening Israel from multiple directions simultaneously, without ever formally declaring war. Every Israeli military operation in Gaza or Lebanon carried Iranian fingerprints somewhere in the supply chain. The Syrian Civil War, 2011 to present. When protests erupted in Syria in 2011 and threatened to topple Bashar al-Assad, Iran made an immediate calculation: Assad's fall would sever the land corridor connecting Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon. That corridor was non-negotiable. Iran deployed Revolutionary Guard advisors, funded Shia militias from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and coordinated with Russia to keep Assad in power. Iranian commanders like Qasem Soleimani became the architects of a war fought by proxies across dozens of front lines. The human cost was catastrophic, hundreds of thousands dead, millions displaced. But from Iran's strategic perspective, the intervention succeeded. Assad survived. The corridor held. And Iran demonstrated that it could project and sustain military force far beyond its own borders for years at a time. The war in Yemen and the Houthi alliance, 2015 to present. Yemen became another theater in Iran's expanding network of armed alliances. The Houthi movement, officially known as Ansar Allah, is a Zaidi Shia rebel group that seized the Yemeni capital Sana'a in 2014 and drew a Saudi-led military coalition into a grinding war. Iran's relationship with the Houthis was not one of creation. The Houthis had their own origins and grievances, but Iran became their critical supplier. Ballistic missiles, drones, anti-ship weapons, and training flowed through smuggling networks. Houthi strikes reached deep into Saudi Arabia and, later, targeted international shipping in the Red Sea. Iran gained a strategic asset on Saudi Arabia's southern border and a disruptive force in one of the world's most important maritime corridors, at relatively low cost. The assassination of Qasem Soleimani and its aftermath, 2020. Few single events in recent history carried the weight of what happened in the early hours of January 3, 2020. A U.S. drone strike near Baghdad International Airport killed Major General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's Quds force and the architect of its regional proxy network. Iran's response was swift. It launched over a dozen ballistic missiles at U.S. military bases in Iraq in the most direct Iranian military strike against American forces in decades. The strikes were precise and deliberate, and Iran gave advance warning through diplomatic channels, suggesting a calculated act of retaliation rather than an escalation toward full war. Yet the episode proved something critical. Iran now possessed the ballistic missile capability to strike accurately at distances exceeding 1,000 kilometers. The Iran-Israel shadow war and the April 2024 direct strike. For decades, Iran and Israel traded blows through intermediaries, assassinations, sabotage, cyber attacks, and proxy skirmishes. Then, on April 1, 2024, an Israeli airstrike destroyed the Iranian consulate annex in Damascus, killing senior Revolutionary Guard commanders. Iran crossed a threshold it had never crossed before. On April 13 and 14, 2024, Iran launched a direct military strike on Israeli territory for the first time in history. Over 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles fired from Iranian soil. Israel, with American, British, Jordanian, and French assistance, intercepted the vast majority. The attack was more significant symbolically than materially. Iran had shattered a long-standing taboo. The age of proxy distance was over, and a new and more dangerous phase of direct confrontation had formally begun. What emerges from tracing these conflicts is not simply a timeline of wars, it is the portrait of a nation in constant negotiation between its geography, its ideology, and its ambitions. Iran has fought conventional battles, covert operations, proxy campaigns, and now direct confrontations. Each conflict shaped the next. The lessons of the Iran-Iraq War produced the missile program. The lessons of Lebanon produced Hezbollah. The lessons of international isolation produced a doctrine of strategic depth through allied militias across the region. Understanding these wars is not just understanding Iran, it is understanding how power, memory, and survival instinct combine to drive a country's choices across generations. If you found this journey through history valuable, consider subscribing so you never miss a video like this one. Drop your thoughts in the comments. There is always more to uncover in these stories than any single video can hold. And stay tuned, because we have more deep dives into history, conflict, and the hidden forces that shape our world coming very soon.